All right. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Pathways to Informatics, where we interview various informatics professionals about their career journeys to give students an idea of all the different pathways that are out there. I'm your host, Brian, and today's guest is Lauren Curtis. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to do a very brief introduction right after this, and then we can jump into the questions. So, Lauren, very excited to have you here today. You want to give the guests just a very brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Lauren. I'm a pharmacist by degree. I'm currently the head of product at Walrus Health, which is a digital health solution for people with chronic conditions.
Yeah, it's very awesome to get to chat with you a little further. I know that even in our brief casual conversation beforehand, we had seen some of our posts, and I've been following you for a while. So very excited to dig deeper into your career history here. Um, we do have a comment already. Hello from Atlanta. I know it's not coming up on our side, but that's from Brian Morris. Hey, Brian, thanks for tuning in. And real quick on housekeeping logistics. So I do have a list of questions that I'm going to go through and ask Lauren here. But because this is a live stream, definitely for the guests that are tuning in, we love to hear from our guests. So leave your questions, and then in between our questions, we'll get to yours, and we can engage with our audience. Okay, so let's jump right in, but let's do an icebreaker real quick. I'm kind of curious how you're going to answer this one, because we both have a passion for fire. So if you had to choose a career, but money is not an issue, so like we're thinking maybe fire here, what would you want to be?
So when I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect. So that might still be on the table. I still think buildings are cool, but I might want to do it somewhere. I think I'd go somewhere like Italy and study like really historic buildings, but also be able to eat gelato like all day. That would be money's not an issue. I'm throwing it at gelato and pasta.
Can't argue with that. Okay. Did that ever where did that interest come from? Were you inspired?
No idea, actually. I think I just thought like it would be a cool job, and then I ultimately decided to go into healthcare because I thought there'd be more money in it, which I think that that always enters people's minds when they're trying to pick a career, and whether or
Of
not it was
course.
misplaced. That's sort of where the pivot came in.
Okay. Very cool. Well, thanks for sharing. It's always interesting to hear, what people would do if money was an issue, kind of thing. Looks like we have Fabrice tuning in as well. Hello from Austin. All right. Thanks for tuning in, Fabrice. Let's dig into the history now then. So I know everyone, gets into healthcare, and in this case, pharmacy, for different reasons, and we'll start from there. What's kind of your origin story when you got into pharmacy?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I transitioned from wanting to do architecture to wanting to be in healthcare, thinking that, well, I'm good at science and I guess there's some better money in it. So like, sure. And I want to help people. But I think as maybe a lot of pharmacists agree with, like I did not want to see blood. So I went
Mm,
into I went to
mhm.
undergrad as a bio major, not really assuming that I would go pre-med because I didn't want to be an MD. Um, and shortly after I started, I was getting really bad headaches, and turns out they were migraines. Um, so I went to student health and was prescribed uh, Imitrex, as the pharmacists on the line will know, and really encountered a pharmacist that sort of like changed everything for me. Not only was it really cool to just hear about how this tiny little pill could heal such big pain, um, it was also just like the empathy for this woman who worked at student health, a pharmacist there, that sort of was like got me thinking, okay, this could be the right path. I could help people in this way. So it really opened my eyes to something that I hadn't really considered before.
Hmm.
The rest is history.
Okay. Yeah, I think Right around those years too, in the early 2000s, I was just thinking about your comments about. I was originally computer science and computer engineering, and money was quite attractive in pharmacy during those years in the early 2000s.
Yes.
And
Yep.
that big money too. So, okay. So you got into pharmacy, and then
Mhm.
you it looks like you were interning in pharmacy school at CVS, and you worked there for quite a few years.
I did.
Um,
Mhm.
and it's always interesting when I talk to people who've been in a particular company for a long time because you made quite a few pivots afterwards, which we'll get into. But can you kind of walk us through what you were thinking in terms of your career in those last few years as you made a huge, like very big jump into something completely different? Like, what were you thinking? What was, yeah, let's walk
Yeah.
us through that.
I think at first, like, I don't want to say I wasn't thinking anything, but like the concept of pivoting careers was not really on my mind. Um, I thought that I'd be at CVS forever.
Mm,
I thought that's all I'd really be able to do. I thought, okay, once a community pharmacist, always a community pharmacist. And the more that time went on, though, it felt clear that the goals that I had for my patients that came in didn't feel like the same goals that the business had for how the store was being run. And that just sort of like they continued to be at odds. And also, the schedule just wasn't working for me. I was about to have my first child and thought, you know what? I'm not going to be there for weekends and for bedtime. I've got to find something that can really make this better for me. And as a store manager, I had like a little bit of control over the schedule, but not much. So that's when I found out about PillPack, and it really felt like at the time it fell into my lap. I found out about it through an old preceptor of mine.
mm,
And he was like, "Hey, look at this cool online pharmacy." And I was like, "I don't even know what that means." Like they weren't really a thing except for, PBM mail order pharmacies. And I emailed. They weren't hiring at the time. I just continued to email until they were, and went in for an interview and was really sold from there that this was the right next step.
mm. It's kudos to you for making such a big leap of faith. I think that's people talk about the golden handcuffs and taking risks and things like that. But kudos to you for making that
Thanks.
change.
Yeah, it was
Um,
certainly scary, but felt worth it. I knew
yeah,
I could
yeah,
always go back.
yeah. That's a good mindset to have. A very very
Yeah.
good mindset to have. Harder said than done, though, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And it's like Naji says, "What is this? This is we're interviewing Lauren, who is a product manager in her journey as a pharmacist, moving to more of a product management role." Okay, so you're at PillPack. Must be. I imagine there's like lots of different feelings there too, in a whole different setting. Can
Mhm.
you tell us what that initial experience was like? Maybe in the first few weeks, maybe first few months when you started at PillPack.
Yeah, I think first of all, it was fantastic. Like the vibe was just so different. I didn't feel as rushed. I didn't feel like I was cheating any of our patients out of, time spent talking to me. And I
Hmm,
was doing clinical work. I was counseling people over the phone, via email, through chat. And I was really getting to do the type of work I wanted to do. I wasn't fulfilling. I was strictly talking to our patients. Um, but as might become a recurring theme during this conversation, I'm not like one of the things that people think about product managers is that we're super technical, and some are. I would not consider myself very
mhm,
technical. So those first 3 weeks, learning like probably 3 to 4 new systems for how, like, prescriptions were being housed, how we were taking in, emails and chats and all of that, learning all of that after having been at CVS and working off the same system the whole time. That was quite an experience, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't think I can do this." Um, so because there's really not like there aren't great pharmacy solutions out there that are all in one. So it was
yeah.
sort of like, how do we piece together a few solutions that meet our needs as a business, which meant I had a lot of new tech to learn about.
Okay, and I guess a quick follow-up on that, thinking about, this kind of different environment, do you feel as though it was what you would expect, what you had expected before going in? Or is it, like, very different than what you had expected?
Um, I mean, I think anytime you join a company, right, you think that you have an understanding based on the interview process and everyone that you met. Um, I think that joining a startup, it's like that times 100, right?
Mm,
Like, you
mhm.
have this sense that, like, things are more together than they really are. And so I think from that perspective, like, I was not prepared for the amount that I was going to be involved in, like, day-to-day decision making about the operation. I thought that I would be a lot like what I did at CVS, where I'd, like, show up,
Mhm.
talk to patients, and then, like, go home, but there was just a lot more to it. There were a lot more pieces to the puzzle, or at least they're probably the same number of pieces, but I was being more exposed to them than I had ever been at CVS.
Very cool. And I think there's a couple of people that talk about startups, especially too. It's like you just learn so much because you do get to see like all these different parts versus like maybe
Yeah.
like one piece. So that's really cool. I imagine it's a little challenging as well, which brings me to the next question, which is in this switch, and maybe thinking more so again in the first few months or maybe first year is like, what did you find most challenging from the switch from CVS to PillPack?
Mhm. Um, I think that I always thought that I was, like, a really great collaborator at CVS. I think all healthcare professionals are great collaborators. That being said, you're usually collaborating with other healthcare professionals, and so the types of conversations that you're having are pretty one track. I was used to talking to nurses and doctors, other pharmacists. Um, I was not prepared by the level of cross collaboration that was happening amongst all different pieces of the organization. And at first, that really posed a challenge for me. Like, I was not used to talking to engineers.
Mm.
And what did they want to talk to me about? And so, like, understanding how to form these new relationships with functions that I had never worked with before um, was challenging. It was a good type of challenging, and it was really exciting, and I was learning a lot. But it was completely brand new, and I felt like a little bit of a fish out of water at first.
Actually, I like the metaphor there. Just kind of, anyways. Um, on that note, can I ask a follow-up question related to the challenge, which is like, were there particular things that you did that you found most helpful? And I'm thinking more so really about that communication barrier because I do think that's a common thing noted in people who change these into these kind of industries that are very different. Is like, what are some things that maybe you found helpful or worked in closing that gap, that maybe that
Mhm.
communication gap in talking with other people besides healthcare folks?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that really helped, and I'm sure that I could say this about other companies too, but often at a startup, the mission is so clear and everybody is so laser focused on that mission that it was pretty easy for me to start having these conversations, realizing how much we're all on the same team. We all want the same result. We're all here trying to do the right thing for our customers. And once I sort of went in with that mindset, it was a lot easier for me to have conversations about really asking the question, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? How does this work? How is this getting us toward the goal? And also realizing that as a healthcare professional, I had something to offer as well. I was talking to engineers that didn't have healthcare background. And so we each kind of had something we could learn from each other. And each of us were taking sort of bits and pieces of that and figuring out how we tied those pieces together to get toward that common goal. Um, I also just think, like, realizing people are just people and kind of getting
Mm.
over this whole concept of like, "Oh, like, they know a lot about computers, they must be smarter than me." like we're all just people. And approaching those conversations as though I just wanted to build a relationship made it really easy moving forward to ask more and more probing questions about some of the technical things, as things progressed.
Mm. I think that's a good one. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm assuming we're all speaking like the same language anyway, so we can relate to each other and talk as people. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes you sit in on an engineering meeting and it might sound like a different language.
okay, well, that's fair. That's fair.
I had plenty of those moments where I was like, I don't know what anybody's saying. Are they going to tell me? But yeah, as long as you're not afraid to ask the question, people are more than happy to answer.
Okay. Good tips right there. All right, let's take a next pivot into your career now. So you want CVS, then startup kind of world with PillPack, and then it's another big shift, this time to a big tech company like Amazon.
Mhm.
3 years later.
Yeah.
Now, I imagine that was a bit of a shift too, because it's not only a larger company, but now it's a large tech company as well. Um, can you now tell me about that a little bit more? Like, what was that experience like?
Yeah. Um, that was something I didn't see happening.
Mm,
And it probably would have been a more jarring transition had it not been through an acquisition, right? Like I didn't decide, oh, I'm going to go join big tech and I'm going to like figure out what things are like at Amazon. Because we joined via acquisition, it wasn't my choice, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a great thing to have happen. Um, and because of how, we sort of slowly integrated, I feel like I was able to sort of ease right on in. And
mm,
so slowly pick up some of the Amazonian things, but also like leveraging what I knew from a pill pack perspective. So I feel really lucky that I was kind of able to ease into big tech instead of it just being this like one day I'm there and I'm looking around and I don't know what's going on. So that, it was a different transition for sure. There are a lot of different teams. The company is huge. You have to talk
mm.
to a million people to get one change done.
Yeah.
If I thought that that was happening at PillPack, this was like that on steroids. It sort of it's interesting because startups move really quickly, and in bigger companies, things just have to slow down a bit because of
Mm,
the number of people involved. And also with the scale of Amazon, if you break something, it breaks at scale, right? So sort of preparing for those types of things and understanding how that was going to affect my job was sort of the transition there.
okay. And in the role here, I think I noticed this was like kind of your first formal product manager title.
Hmm.
Um, can maybe you describe a bit more about that too? Because actually, to be more specific, you came onto Amazon as a senior program manager,
That's right.
and then you 1 year later had a formal title of senior product manager, and it kind of blends into the next questions where I want to ask about more about what product management is and stuff. But can you tell me more about the transition between senior program manager and senior product manager, maybe even what those roles mean?
Yeah. Oof.
Take your time. Take your
Great
time.
question, Brian.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, it's funny because I talk to people a lot about all of these PM roles, right? There's project, there's program, there's product. Um, what's the difference between all of them? And the frank answer is that at every company there are slight nuances and
Mm,
differences about what's expected in each role. So I'll just go super specific because I find that it's helpful in this particular conversation. So um, in my program management role, I was much more operationally focused. I was working on workflows, how things that were happening in the product were going to affect the operation, and how did we get get the teams ready? How did we train them? How did we, make sure that the tools were built to support the service that we were trying to deliver? Um, And so my role as a senior program manager when we first got acquired was really trying to understand from an operational perspective, how was Amazon Pharmacy, right? Like we had not launched as a pharmacy yet. We were PillPack, we were owned by Amazon. You know, how was the launch of an Amazon Pharmacy concept going to impact our operation? Could we use all of our old systems? Could we use all of our old policies and processes? What needed to change to sort of support that larger launch? And as I got closer to what that launch meant, right? Like, what is the offering that we're going to be delivering? What's the service? What's the customer experience going to look like? It was a natural progression for me to then work on the product itself, which in my case was, working on sort of the post onboarding experience for customers, all the way through to their purchase experience. So, what did it look like when people needed to, you know, acquire a prescription on their behalf? If we needed to acquire a prescription on their behalf, what did it look like when we needed to bill that prescription? Um, so it was an easy transition because I was already a subject matter expert in that area. But it was much more focused on like, what does the product offering look like, rather than like, how is the business going to run based on this product offering, if that makes sense. That was sort of the very specific change that I went through. But as a program manager, I was still having product impact. I was still having conversations with the engineers. I was still designing workflows. But often my job would end with like, oh, this is my recommendation from an operational perspective. But
Mm.
it was really the product team that was helping to prioritize that. So the things that I was recommending may or may not get done. Whereas on product, I was the one prioritizing those types of things.
It's always super interesting. So this, I should say, as full transparency, that this conversation is also selfish because I'm trying to learn more about product management. So thank you for sharing that. Can I also ask as a follow up, in your transition there, which was super helpful for you to use those specifics, is did you have any like intentions in moving that route? Maybe to product management as you started to do your work, because it sounds like you're saying as a program manager your work kind of ended at those recommendations. Did you feel like maybe I wanted to continue? Like, what, how did that happen? Did you push yourself towards that direction, or
Um, I don't think I was really pushing myself toward it. I was really happy doing what I was doing.
mm,
But I was naturally often interfacing with the product team.
mm.
Um, and I think I always just saw it as like, oh, they're way more technical. I don't understand what, what's a roadmap, and like, what's Scrum and what's a sprint? Like, I think I was letting the terminology get in the way when really I was like already a part of these processes. Um, so I don't necessarily think I was like headed in that direction or was making a plan to head in that direction. But it felt really natural. And then once I started doing it, I was like, oh yeah, I was like already doing a lot of all of this work because there is so much overlap in the role types. It was just much more official. And I'm seeing here with Ryan's comments. Yeah, road mapping, backlog, and grooming. Um, all of that felt really natural. Like, of course, I'm seeing the things that I helped put on the backlog, in my in my line of work now. So I'm like, oh yeah, now I understand why these things were deprioritized, because we have all of these other big things that need to happen and we have limited resources. So I gained a much greater appreciation for how that prioritization works as a business. Um, but I wasn't necessarily aiming at it. It
Mhm.
kind of happened.
And I guess like to jump to some of these comments here, maybe we'll get your thoughts on some of them. Is McKay says, I heard someone joke that a junior product manager knows the answer and a senior product manager doesn't. How do you feel about that, Lauren?
Um, there is some truth to that. That's
Okay.
funny.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
funny. Yeah, it's definitely gives you, there are different the different levels will be, you're in the weeds to a certain extent when you're on the junior level. All of the ins and outs of how
Mm,
everything is working. And then as you move up the ranks, you're really thinking more strategically, and thinking about how this fits in as part of the whole. And actually, like I didn't really mention this, but one of the other things that was really a transition for me was that as program manager, I was really looking at the entire experience end to end at how the operation was functioning for this new product offering. Um, but as a product manager, sometimes your scope is like pretty small, but
Mm,
the depth that you have is so much deeper. And that was new territory for me. I was more about like the breadth of things before, and product managers have to go super deep into one area.
mm. Super interesting. And I guess maybe a personal question to you on that is, do you now like to go deeper, or do you still prefer the breadth kind of thing?
I will say I like both. I don't have a preference,
Mm,
but I have gained a real appreciation for the fact that you can't do both at the same time. So it's one or the
fair.
other for me, but it's not both together.
Mm. Okay. But we have a comment from, so you can't see it on the chat here, but it's from Beju. Says hello from Charleston. I don't know if you know Beju, or you may.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice. So Beju says hi. And we do have a question from Naji here, which is, were you the only woman in the role, and was it stressful?
That's a great question. I wasn't. Actually, the product management team that helped launch Amazon Pharmacy was not only mostly women, but it was led by women too. Um, Now, that's not to say that we weren't working with mostly male engineering teams,
Hmm.
but from a product perspective, my peers were mostly women. There are plenty of female engineers at Amazon. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's male dominated.
Yeah, I was thinking, figure like demographic wise, their typical STEM careers are probably more male dominated. And now that I think about it, I wonder if product managers in the product managers that you've worked with, have they been predominantly male or women,
Um,
or you
it
does
might
it kind of 50-50?
Yeah, it's pretty 50-50. I haven't really
Okay.
noticed. So to me, that means 50-50. Or in fact, as a pharmacist, sometimes if I don't notice, it means that it's predominantly female just because that's what I'm used to in the pharmacy industry, right? Like we're still
Mhm.
at last I checked, it's still 60-40 or 70-30 and somewhere in that
Yeah,
range.
and I think it's been creeping up uh over the years, and I think last time it was, yeah, 60 or 70 something percent like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beju has a question for you here, which is actually one that I'm wondering as well for myself. Is there value for keeping a pharmacist license after a few years in health tech? Asking for a friend.
You know what, Beju? I ask myself this every other year when it's time to renew my license.
Ah,
Um,
interesting.
I so to be totally transparent, well, I'm not going to give any advice here, right? Like, do what you think is best. I did say earlier that, like, oh, I could always go back. I do not see myself going back to retail pharmacy. To be clear, like, I don't think that that's a path for me. But I did just at the end of last year drop my. I had two state licenses. I dropped one, and so that was like a
Wow.
big step for me. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to drop that. Sorry if there's background noise. There's a train passing. Um, but I did drop my second state license. I still have my primary license.
Wow.
I
Can,
think
can we
it
ask
depends.
why, or what
I
was the
just
main?
like, why did I need it? It's not the state that I live in. I haven't needed my license for several years, probably 7 years now. Um, and it just felt like one more thing to keep up with. Like,
Mm,
you've got to do the different CE requirements for this state than that
mhm.
state. And one does it by every 2 years, and the other one does it by like, you have to fit in a number every year. It was just like a lot to juggle. And I thought, I don't need this. And I still have my primary one, but I have thought about maybe one day.
One day.
Wait.
Drop.
So yeah, I mean, if his real question was like, should I consider dropping it? that's sort of my take on that. But like, does it have value in certain roles? No. Like, no one's looking and saying, "Oh, she's licensed. Therefore, we're gonna have her do this other type of work." Like, I have a PharmD, I have the background. Um, no one's asking me for like how current my license is these days.
I think everyone's tuning in late. We're seeing some more comments trickle in here.
Yeah. Lots of friends joining. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we keep on this roll of comments here. Looks like Naji asked the question. That's a very interesting one. So with the role, does the man get paid better than female, or is the pay the same?
Good question. Um, I mean, I am all for pay transparency. But if that was happening, I didn't know about it. Certainly across the board, I think we see that males are paid better than females. But is it happening more in this, in the tech landscape than it is anywhere else? I don't think so necessarily. But I do think that it's really important for women to have the conversation about what is fair, what is, do your research and make sure that you're negotiating. I think that that goes for anyone
Hmm.
who's in
Hmm.
this space or any role.
Yeah, I did a interview with three of my pharmacy informatics colleagues a couple years ago on YouTube, and we had a big chat with like what's the pharmacist salaries look like for men versus women, and then the literature we saw at the time, and this is a while ago now, seemed to suggest that there was not much evidence in pharmacy specifically, but they of
Mhm.
course drew on other fields and found the exact same thing you were kind of suggesting there. But it's interesting. I feel like it'd be good to look into pay transparency will help with these questions.
Yes,
Um,
I follow Salary Transparent Street just like hopefully everyone else. I think that's an awesome channel to follow on social.
Sponsored? Okay, this is just kidding.
I wish, no. They're doing the work out there asking people what they
Yep.
make, and
Mhm.
I think it's an important conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a question from Dennis, who I believe you know.
Mhm.
Is it a question? Actually, I didn't read it. So, what parts of your pharmacist experience or education do you think you leverage most of as head of product? Also, drop your license.
Yes, let's have, like, a drop your license party together, Dennis. I'm in.
Nice.
I'm in. Yeah, so this depends on the product, I think.
Mm.
At Amazon Pharmacy, I was really focused on the customer experience, and so I was really putting myself in the shoes of somebody in a retail pharmacy. What would have made that experience a lot more delightful for them, right? Like, we all know that the waits are incredibly long sometimes. Prescriptions aren't ready, prescriptions are expensive, they don't understand why it's so expensive. And so I was really focused on how I could improve that experience for customers. How might we better communicate with them ahead of time around things that are unexpected? How can we make things as quick as possible? And then in my current role, I am focused on the end user experience as well, but I also build tools for clinicians, so for the pharmacists that work for us. And so, and I did a little bit of this at PillPack as well, but so I'm really sort of like putting that pharmacist hat back on. And I'm like, okay, well, what type of information would I need to make a good clinical recommendation for someone? And so I'm sort of like thinking through how I would compile that. At CVS, we were going through multiple different screens to access multiple different things. Fill history was in a different place than drug information, which was in a different place than like coupons if we wanted to get them for people. And so, how can we, you know, aggregate all of this so that pharmacists can leverage all of the information they need to make better and quicker and more informed decisions? Um, so yeah, it kind of just depends on the type of product. But I think that I try to look at both perspectives, like me as a patient as well as me as a pharmacist. Hopefully
Okay.
that answers the question, Dennis.
And Dennis actually asked my next question, which was was kind of looped into all of it together, which was basically like some of the similarities and differences. But I think that's a better way of asking the question. So we're just going to stick to Dennis's question. We do have one more question from the audience. We'll take that and then we'll jump to the next question on my list here, which is also from Naji again. Just being a woman in this big role, how do you keep level-headed and what do you say to yourself to continue being a leader? What advice would you give to someone who wants to be an up-and-coming leader?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for viewing me as a leader. I appreciate that. I think that, I mean, as far as remaining level-headed, I think I go back to being really mission driven again and understanding that like we're all in this together. We're all trying to do what we think is best and trying to understand why maybe people are at odds with what I would prefer to do and like why a disagreement is happening. Um, I tend to really try to understand where people are coming from before getting argumentative or defensive about things. But it is really hard to be a woman in leadership, especially if you have, if you have a confidence problem or you don't like to speak in groups. Like these can come off, I think, in different ways for women than they do men. Also, confident women can come off in and be perceived in different ways than they are men. Um, but advice that I would give to someone, so okay, specifically around how my role and how my career has progressed. Um, it's always been really easy for me to leverage the healthcare background to make me feel really confident in what I'm saying. If I were to go to a completely different industry, it may be a lot harder for me to feel like a leader and to feel like I can speak up and speak my mind. I think that if you have that background, it just gives you that extra oomph and like why behind what you're saying. You know that you know what you're talking about. First of all, you've been to school for it. You've worked in the industry. You've seen what's happening to clinicians and to patients. And that usually makes it a lot easier for me to speak my mind. So I say that. And also, like, really what's important to me in a leader is making sure that you're bringing people along with you and it's not just about you. So what's always been really important to me is making sure that I have a really strong team that is going to make me look good, but also that I can help and shape their careers. That's been really important to me along the way.
Love the answer, especially the last part that you gave is like I personally admire individuals that bring up others, and I've always viewed those people as leaders. I absolutely love that piece of it.
And nothing makes you feel more like a leader than like getting people promoted from under you. Like that's an amazing feeling.
Absolutely. Great question that came up and great answer from Lauren. We have a couple more questions that came up. Quick shout out to Jonathan for tuning in. Looks like he had to drop off. Let me ask one of my questions and we'll jump back over here. Again, these are selfish questions that I had because I want to learn more about this. So excuse me for a second. I'm going to ask Lauren this next question, which is, what are the most common misconceptions? Because I have a lot of them. what do you think are the most common misconceptions when it comes to product management? I'm sure you hear quite a few.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot. So I'll throw out the one that I held for a really long time, which was like, they need to be so technical. You talked to me when I first joined, right? I was having technical difficulties. It happens to me all the time. I do tend to do a little better with software than I do hardware. I will say that. But I held that for a really long time. And it's because, but they're talking to engineers. Well, like the engineers aren't talking like robots and computers the whole day. Like they're having real conversations about real world problems that we're trying to solve. So that's one misconception. I think maybe I'll take a totally different angle with this one, is that I think there's a misconception that the job is really easy, right? Like, well, you don't really have to do the work, right? You like dream about what the product should look like and you write it down and then you give it to engineers and they go build it. Like they're the ones doing all the hard work. And parts of that are true. Like, I will buy into that sometimes. I'm like, man, I have the easy part, right? They have to figure out how to make all of this work flawlessly. Um, but it really is challenging in a good way. I mean, you do have to balance the business needs, what you know the customers need, what your internal teams are asking for. You're constantly having to prioritize and knowing that you're probably going to be letting somebody down every day by the decisions that you're making. Um, so you have to be really convicted in why you're doing what you're doing, why you're choosing what you're choosing, and you have to be a really good communicator about, being able to talk people through those trade-offs. I don't know if people are saying that they think it's easy, but I tend to think it's
That's that's
happening.
that's probably one of the more common ones I hear too. Is different people who are not in product management roles. I hear say, "Oh, product management's easy," but I feel like maybe that's also common against other things. If you're not in that role, you're like, "Oh, this person has it very easy doing this kind of thing," stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the interpretations I made, maybe it was a bit of a hop to get here, is that I had heard about a study. I don't know if you read this one, where they did a survey of people. Sorry, another train. I don't know if you guys can hear it.
You're good. You're good. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Um, they did a survey of people on how well compensated they thought they were in their role. And product managers were like on top of the number of people that think that they're compensated
Hmm.
properly for their role. And I think, we could talk all day about pharmacists and the pay that's happening in pharmacy right now. And so I kind of took that one step of like, if a lot of people aren't happy with what they're being paid today. Like, there's a lot of people that are in underpaid roles. Um, and if a lot of product managers are saying that they're being paid well for what they do, I think that the next logical step is for some people to say, like, oh, they're paid really well and it's probably pretty easy. It's low stress, high pay. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I thought it was a really interesting survey.
Hmm. And I guess like even thinking about that, because like my misconception has been similar to those actually. Is like maybe it seems like an easy job. It seems like you get paid really well, probably easy to get into. Obviously, this is all incorrect,
It's
um,
hard to get
but
into.
it seems like in the last few years, especially, I've heard a lot about people getting into product management for these type of reasons. Like I'm like, oh, well, I want to do product management because it's probably easy and you make a lot of money. So I hear that quite often, especially in the last few years.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy in the sense that you don't have to learn to code. I don't know how to code. So, you don't have to have a whole bunch of additional certifications or anything like that, if that's what we're going to say is easy. But um, there are definitely challenges in every job. But yeah, those are the
Absolutely.
misconceptions I hear the most often.
Okay. And then I have a couple of questions that will wrap them up, but it seems like there's some good questions that might even incorporate the ones I was going to ask. So first one is from Adam here. You're amazing, Lauren. What would you say was the biggest defining moment in your career so far?
Oh, Adam. I know Adam from PillPack.
Oh, nice.
Thanks, Adam. Um, that is a very good question. Um, I think that
I heard
trains
that one.
yeah, trains honking now, or whatever, beeping, whatever trains do.
Yeah.
So I'd say that being on the launch team for Amazon Pharmacy was one of the biggest moments, if not the biggest moment of my career. Um, I would have been happy on that launch team regardless of what role I had at the time. But it just felt so monumental. Um, it felt big, it felt important, and not to say that the work that I was doing at PillPack did not feel that way. It absolutely did, and honestly, at a startup, you feel that impact so much because every customer, like you care about every customer that you obtain. Um, But yeah, I'd say, okay, maybe 2 moments. The first is when I first transitioned out of a clinical role. Like, that was a pretty big defining moment from like okay, I can actually do more things and I can leverage my clinical knowledge in a way that I had never even imagined. I didn't even know these roles existed. And then, but then, yeah, the next big moment would be like sort of solidifying. that position by launching something as big as Amazon Pharmacy.
Okay. I felt the excitement as you were speaking about it. So it's really cool to hear about these things. That was a good question from Adam.
It was cool. Yeah. It was a great experience.
Okay. Let's ask the one from Fabrice, and then we're going to start wrapping up with some concluding questions. So it's a great one, too. I imagine a lot of the pharmacy students and pharmacists asking, do you think today a student pharmacist out of school will need residency to get into informatics or tech world or product manager like your position? Well, should I get the popcorn for this one? Or all right, go ahead.
I think the answer is so unsatisfying. It depends. Okay, so here's the deal. I think, and I would love maybe Brian from a more like traditional informatics perspective, maybe you have a different answer, but here's what I see in my side of tech. A lot of the solutions out there are pretty niche, right? Like we've got all these point solutions, we've got diabetes solutions, we've got heart solutions. Because of that, if you're going into a clinical role and you want to work in tech, I do think a residency may help because we've got, if you're going to a company that works on diabetes, it is probably helpful for you to have a residency or additional certifications in that area. That being said, I think the advice that I give people most often is to know your audience. This doesn't help as far as like, should you do a residency or not? But when you're crafting a resume, for example, to get into roles like this, if you're being hired by a non-clinician, they don't know what those things are, right? They don't know what the value of a residency is. They don't know what those certifications are. And so largely they don't matter if you're going for a non-clinical role or you're being hired by a non-clinician. If you are being hired by a clinician who has a clinical team, then yes, it's helpful. So it depends. And I hate that because it's the worst answer. But I say like I would say to any student to like really talk to people and understand what these types of roles are, because depending on what path you want to take, the answer may be different. And so it's hard to prepare yourself for all of them, but that's my 2 cents. I don't know if you think is it similar in like traditional informatics careers?
Why did you put me in the hot seat? This is an interview about
Sorry,
you.
I just because I was like, oh, I don't want to disagree with what Brian might say here.
Oh no, so I guess like I look at it in a different way, not in a different way from you necessarily, but like I think definitely if you go into a clinical type role, people understand the value of a residency, and it's helpful because you get a lot of breadth. It's just like another year of learning. I mean, I imagine there's a positive correlation with the more time you spend learning, just focused on learning and, just in general. So I imagine it's helpful. The question is about needed though. So I think that's where it's a little harder because I think both in clinical and non-clinical roles, experience is helpful. Mm-hmm. Whether it's residency or just job experience, I think it's helpful. And when I say job experience here, I mean like practicing as a pharmacist. Mm-hmm. I think, especially in informatics roles, I say to pharmacy informatics folks all the time that if you're developing tools that your pharmacists are using, it's very helpful. And if anything, for credibility purposes, to say, oh, I've done this. I know the types of things you want. So work experience specifically, not necessarily residency, is good.
Yeah.
But I think it's what you put into it anyways. Kind of depends. Anyways, let me switch back to you over here. We're going to start wrapping up this interview, and it's already 15 minutes. It's went by pretty fast.
Good.
A few overarching questions for you, Lauren, which Adam already kicked us off with. But I think let's jump into the very first one, which maybe is similar to Adam's question. Is what do you think is the most impactful thing or things that has made you successful in your product management career?
Hmm. Um, I think I think it's probably innate for all healthcare professionals that there's this element of being lifelong learners. Some of it is
Mm.
mandated because to keep our licenses.
So,
Uh, but I truly think that that's just it tends to be a characteristic that a lot of us have, and that has served me really well in my career. Um, I I hate to put it this way because it sounds like I'm like advocating for always like doing more than you're asked to do, but because I don't want anybody burning out by like trying to take on too much work to do all this learning. But there was an element of me just truly being so interested in taking on different things because it was outside of my comfort zone, but I felt really safe about doing it. Um, that I saw problems and I wanted to solve them. And people will always appreciate having a problem solver around. And so I was I was doing that. I also happened to be very lucky to have people in my corner, really good managers that were willing to develop those skills and let me sort of take them wherever it took me and wherever I wanted it to go. But yeah, I think if you're just constantly trying to learn in your roles, you're really not going to lose.
mm, I love it. Those are probably similar ones to me. Lifelong learning, love to problem solve, good mentors. Okay. This is a fun one. If you were to go back in time, what would you wish you had known when starting off in your career? Given that, the stuff that you've known now, like, would you change anything? Would you do anything different?
Yeah. Actually, this sort of relates back to the residency question, sort of. I don't have a residency. I don't know if that was clear, but I think that if I had known this is the direction that I'd be headed, I was so focused on the clinical aspects when I was doing rotations.
Mhm.
Um, I would have paid a lot more attention to like the tools that were being used. Like, why are we using these tools? Like, what tech is being used? What are these, what systems are we leveraging? How is all this information flowing? Those types of things like really weren't coming to mind when I was doing rotations. Um, and I think that it would have set me up to be thinking about this industry just a lot differently from the beginning. And so I imagine that for most people here interested in informatics, maybe their brains already work that way. But at the time for me, uh, it wasn't something I was thinking about at all. And so the concept that I'd ever be working on these types of systems and building these things, it never occurred to me. So I think that probably would have accelerated how quickly I got to where I am. But I'm happy with the path I took. I learned a lot. I've had a lot of different roles. It's been fun.
Yeah. Hindsight's always 2020 as well, right? You never, I know. We're happy to be where we are, and you're in obviously a great position and the whole trajectory in your career. So, um, say you did pretty good. Um, okay, so this one maybe you may have answered in some ways, but I'll ask it anyways to see what has been the most challenging time in your career as a pharmacist in product? So more so specifically honing in your product roles. What has been the most challenging time in your career and why?
Hmm. Um, I think that this is not a specific time, but I think one of the hardest hurdles to get over as a clinician or a pharmacist in product is pharmacists tend to be, we tend to be sort of rigid and by the book, and because we're type A and we like things to be a certain way, it makes us feel very
Yeah.
comfortable. Um, Product relies on big picture thinking, big ideas, big scary ideas that don't seem possible. And I constantly find, and it's like sort of starting to get better, but it has taken me years. It is very hard to think first about like how things could be and how things should be, without getting so bogged down with the like, oh, but this isn't legal and we can't do it that way. And like just allowing yourself to think big, is actually a lot harder than it sounds when you come from this background, but it is absolutely required in my job. So I deal with that struggle every day, right? Not to be the constant Debbie Downer of like, oh, but is this, is this HIPAA compliant? And oh, can we do that in this state? First, like start with the big idea, dream big, and you can worry about the details as they come.
I feel like this is a good time to say, like, tell me you're a pharmacist without telling me you're a pharmacist. Type A is definitely one of our traits. And that, yeah, that's a great challenge that you mentioned, though. I can see that. Okay, so we have a couple comments here. We have Mary Kate tuning in from Hampshire. I don't know who the LinkedIn user is. Says, thanks for sharing the perspective, Lauren. Thanks for facilitating and joining the journey. Shout out to whoever that person is, because we can't see the name. And Margaret says, hello from Wisconsin. Hello. Okay. Last question of the day. I know a lot of my colleagues have mentioned product management as an interest and a career path. What advice would you give to someone that has that interest?
Well, first, I would consume a lot of information about what it actually is, because I think there's a lot of misinformation about what it is. And I also think that there are a lot of product adjacent roles that are also really good and shouldn't be discounted. But if after doing your research, you've decided that product management is for you, there's a lot of really great content creators out there here on LinkedIn, that put out daily amazing content on what product management really means, what it's like to be a product manager, what it's like to build a product org. And I highly recommend following them, as well as like, subscribing to their newsletters, just to get sort of that daily dose of like, how are they thinking? How does all of this look day to day? Because I'll say that aside from pharmacy, which has its own rigid set of rules, product is it's a relatively rigid type of environment. Like there's a real flow to what you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be doing it. And everybody can kind of add their own things, but like it's a pretty regimented career. And luckily I learned that at Amazon, which is probably the most regimented of them all. When it comes to this, maybe not. This is some of the other FANG companies as well. But as far as like documentation that's expected, the number of rounds of people that have to approve things, it's pretty regimented. So I'd say understand what that looks like, and then start talking to people. Start asking what their jobs look like day to day. There are so many different ways that a product career can manifest itself, whether you're building things for end users, whether you're doing product for, data, and how it's used and stored in your business. You could be building internal tools for clinicians, as I mentioned. Product is broad, and I highly recommend sort of like focusing on what you'd like out of it, and then start connecting with people, start having conversations. And then if in your current role, you're able to sort of start taking on some of those responsibilities or sitting in on meetings, that type of thing, do it, because product is all about showing impact on the business. And so as much experience as you can doing that in your current role will always help you.
Very nice. And maybe to follow up on your advice here, do you want to plug any of those like content product folks in here that folks can follow?
Yeah. I mean, will you have a way of like...
So you can just verbalize them and maybe...
Oh, well, yeah. So one of my favorites is Diego Granados. He used to work for LinkedIn. He just changed roles. But he is fantastic. He has paid programs, but he has a lot of free YouTube content. He's amazing. Will Lawrence is another one. Once you start, yeah, thanks.
Phil Lawrence.
Will Lawrence, yeah.
Oh,
Once you
Will
start
Lawrence.
following one, I think they're all like it's pretty easy to find the other ones. Um, Also, I'm never gonna be able to pronounce his last name, but Lenny, there's Lenny, I'll just say R. He's got a newsletter called Lenny's Lenny's Newsletter. He also has a podcast, and he has a lot of great product content. Lenny Richowski. I'm gonna totally mess it up.
Oh, I think I found them. Like, keep going. Oh yeah, I found them. Lenny
Yeah.
Wachowski. Got him.
Yeah, they're all yes, that's him. Richitsky. Yeah, I totally butchered that. Those are probably 3 of my favorite follows in the space. And like I said, yeah, you find one and then they start like you start sort of linking out to others. That'll turn into a fun little rabbit hole. But yeah, learn as much as you can. There's some great content out there from some great people.
Okay. Well, that concludes the interview, and we're slightly over an hour here. But let's talk about where people can learn more about you, because I know there's a lot of folks that probably want to do that. Is there any type of plugs or shares that you can send us so they can learn more about you?
Yeah. Well, first they can connect with me on LinkedIn. And happy to my DMs are always open. And the next is that there's a link to my website in my LinkedIn profile. That's it. And what you can find there are, it's my website, it's my free newsletter. I also have a list of companies that I break down in health tech space for people because I have people that are coming to me not just in pharmacy, but in other specialties as well that have questions about health tech. So if you have any questions about companies, I have a list there. So yeah, that's sort of the main hub of where you can find my content. But I would love for people to sign up for the newsletter. I actually still need to get one out tonight. It goes out on Thursdays, and I don't have a specific time that I send it. So it keeps getting later and later, but it'll go out tonight.
I hope you link this video in your
Yeah,
newsletter
I
as well.
should. Yeah, I should.
Plug. Anyways, okay.
Plug.
Yeah, plug within a plug. A little inception plug there.
Yeah.
Adam says, thanks, Lauren and Brian. Love this. Thank you guys for tuning in. And actually, as we wrap up, thank you to everyone that tuned in and engaged and asked questions. And then, of course, a big, big thank you to Lauren for spending a nice entire hour with us to share your experience, your career journey.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this was really fun.
This was fun. Yeah, thanks so much.
And I know it's just maybe a preview. We're going to do something similar again very soon. So, okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Laura, if you want to stay on, and we're just going to end the stream. But thanks everyone else for tuning in.